represent. The next slide. Just a flavor of our members. The next one. So you might be sitting there and you're asking yourself, why now? Why are we talking about launching an operations and maintenance working group? We have seen that solar PV industry in South Africa has been growing rapidly, especially after load shedding or around load shedding. And it's been growing in all market segments, residential, CNI, and utility scale. So we have all these assets that are currently installed in the country. We need to ensure that these assets are efficient and are able to give performance that were designed for, and they produce a maximum return on investment. But most importantly, that all these assets are always operated in a safe manner. So that is important. So this working group will bring together members in the industry to collaborate, to share challenges that they're facing, to develop a uniquely South African best practices. And we believe that as a unified voice, we will be able to even shape policy and ensure that our members are able to members and the country and the industry at large is able to have assets that are fit for purpose going forward. Next slide. Without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Mr. Nicol Looting. He is the head of operations and maintenance at Anthem, one of our members. He brings a wealth of experience, over 25 years of experience. His experience is not just local experience, but it's also international experience, where he has worked in Africa, countries like Kenya, and in East Asia, countries like Indonesia. So Nicol is a professional registered engineer. And like I said, he currently leads Anthem as the head of operation and maintenance. Thank you, Nicol. You can share your presentation.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Sim, first of all, for the invite as well as the introduction. I just
Nicol, I'm not sure it's just me. Seems like I've lost him.
Yes, I can hear him on my side as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll try and nudge him. Apologies about that, colleagues. We're just trying to get Nicol again on the call. Sorry about that, colleagues. Just managed to get a hold of him. He just had the internet grumblings. He should be back with us within 30 seconds or so, minutes maximum. Apologies about that. Thank you.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I can hear.
Apologies for that delay. Very awkward. Seeing that we talk about backup power, renewables, and I'm sitting in an environment without an inverter, and the power just dropped right when I started. Okay, but let's continue. So I'm not sure if up until when you heard about when I started. Just want to say, number one, it was mentioned, but it's very skilled and experienced people that will join today. Some of those things, it's definitely not an error and not the case that I have an MBA and a PhD and all of those things. I am, however, electrical and electronics engineer, as mentioned, registered, as well as been studied at the University of Stellenbosch. So having said that, the topic for today is getting O&M right, some best practices principles, and I am going to refer to a document that actually has been commissioned some time ago by SAPIA as well as the Solar Power Europe, and that will be the O&M best practice guidelines. And in the end of the slide, I will also give it where to get hold of it. As mentioned, I'm head of O&M in ANFIM. Just quickly, what is ANFIM? So it's one of the largest IPPs South Africa. We do have currently live 2.7 gigawatts of projects, with 17 projects is in operation. I have been the asset manager for those, technical asset manager overseeing, but since last year, I've moved to the O&M space, and as a fully integrated IPP, we also start to move into doing the O&M ourselves in-house, and we will get to that in the slides in terms of the owner's mindset, basically, and how we actually improve O&M on sites if you're actually the owner as well. We do have 5 projects under construction, around about 940 megawatts. One project financial close, that's NOTSI. It was recently in the news for 720 megawatts. That will come online most likely in 4 years. Construction has started, and then right now I'm running a total of 500 megawatt, which will increase to 700 megawatt in the next 3 months. And then there's just a few other things. I think something nice is what the IPP is doing, 600 million in social, economic, and enterprise development spent, supported nearly 1,200 SMEs. And at the bottom is obviously generation, which is quite substantial. But let's get to the presentation. So, quotes from an anonymous, but I think it's applicable to this presentation. So reliability is not a feature you add at the end. This is the end of a project or at the end of your design construction. It is a discipline you build from the beginning. So I think very, very applicable as we go through the slides, but we will see that it's all about planning, scheduling, performing what we're supposed to do. And if something happens, that we actually replan for it. Otherwise, it just becomes a delay, and the cost for that is massive. So just in terms of Africa, I mean, we talk about O&M, but just want to start off to say the solar fleet is aging. So South Africa reached gigawatt scale in 2016, the oldest REAP assets, and this is the around 1 projects of a government program, are now approaching a decade in operation. And it does matter because the operational phase covers by far the longest period of any project life cycle. And typically in South Africa, although the initial REAP programs were 20-year PPAs, you can extend these plants, and it's going to be 25 to 30 years, in some instances, definitely to 35 years. So O&M life cycle of 25 to 30 years. So just on the right side, so you're sitting with all these plants, but if we look at the some numbers, so potential yield reduction on a poorly maintained plant, that's massive. So, and I can go into the technical details. We don't have today the time for it. Why it's up to 70% and what cause things like this. But these are not numbers. 10% on soiling losses. So these are not numbers I've come up with or things I can substantiate with experience and what we have seen on our plants. However, this is coming out of the, as I've mentioned, the SAPIA and Solar Power Europe own best practice guidelines. It is highlighted there, so it is actual factual information and not only thumbs up. So that's just the background to where we sit. We sit with actually quite a big platform of assets and projects that obviously needs to be maintained under the O&M. So just before we get to what good O&M looks like, it obviously helps to understand why O&M underperforms. So there are 3 root causes, and they do show up at every scale. So in other words, we have mentioned that there's different members on this call. It's not only IPPs, there's utility scales, there's your rooftop solars, developers, OEMs, and. So it is actually applicable to all aspects, not only to utility scale. So failure mode 1, reactive culture. So when most operators treat O&M as a call-out function. So if something breaks, someone goes to fix it. And obviously the problem is that preventative maintenance, if it's scheduled, planned, executed in advance, it is a core of any professional O&M program. So the moment you are living in corrective and extraordinary maintenance, you are paying more, your downtime is longer, and your asset is degrading faster than it needs to be. Okay, the second one is monitoring nobody reads. I think that's, yeah, it does happen. So monitoring infrastructure is usually there. Most modern plants and business utility scale do have SCADA systems, but also the inverter at house, your C&I rooftops. It does have a monitoring portal, even some of them on your app, on your phone. So the gap is not the technology, it is about the active management of its data. So the biggest thing is alarm fatigue. And if your system generates 500 alarms a day and nobody has a structured way to look at that and work through it, then effectively you don't have any monitoring system. So yeah, it's if you just generate records, there's no intelligence, then it's a failure as well. So the third failure mode, outsourcing accountability. And this one I will touch on later again in my slides when it comes to good O&M. So it is one of the most important, and it is the least discussed. So as an O&M service provider, they optimize for their contracts. And so basically what I'm trying to say here is they are starting to look after their, I think the best way how I can put it, there's a couple of things, but in the only way how outsourced O&M service providers can make their own money is by doing less of the maintenance that they're supposed to do, or taking shortcuts, or do certain things not what they're supposed to do because it costs them money. I think that's the easiest way almost that I can put it. This is a generalization, but these are things that you see. I think it comes back to the situation of, and I will touch on it in terms of from owner's mindset coming in. But yeah, it's outsourced accountability. It's really important. It can work. It works obviously very well, but it must be managed very well as well. Okay, then we go to the 4 pillars I want to discuss in terms of good maintenance. So number 1 is the planned maintenance. So the annual maintenance plan is not a calendar suggestion. It is an operational commitment. The core principle here is straightforward. Schedule maintenance during periods when the plant is not generating, whenever possible. So for solar, that means obviously it's in the night window. But as I've said, where possible. And when you do this, the trade-off between uptime and maintenance disappears. There's no lost generation. The only question is whether you have planned planned it properly in terms of your maintenance that you're supposed to do. So, as a useful diagnostic, if a maintenance plan does not have specific dates, specific time windows, and logic about when during the day or night those activities will be executed, it is a wish list and not a plan. And when plans get deferred, so delayed for whatever reason, and the rule is simple: reschedule immediately, not next month, this week, because we'll do it next month. Repeated 4 times becomes a maintenance backlog, and the maintenance backlog is how latent faults become forced outages. A skipped service, this is really important. A skipped service or maintenance being performed is never a saving. It is actually just a deferred cost with interest. So next KPI, it's KPIs, it's next pillar. KPIs we actually use. So most of our O&M reporting South Africa tracks the plant KPIs, which most of you will know about: performance ratios, specific yield, availability. And these are necessary, but they only tell obviously half a story. So the left column on the screen tells you what your asset produced, and the right one tells you how well your service provider or your O&M service provider, or if you perform it yourself, but still the O&M function, how well it's managed. And you do need both. You can't only have one and measure one and not the other one. So O&M service provider KPIs, which is acknowledgement time, the intervention time, the response time, the resolution time, are not yet widely implemented and used in South Africa. And so if you are not measuring how fast faults are acknowledged and resolved, you have no objective basis for performance management. You are actually relying on the contractor's own narrative. So think about what response time actually measures. And this is one of the KPIs on the screen on the right. It is a time from detecting a fault to having a technician on site. So that number tells you more about whether your contractor is actually running an O&M operation than any report that they can write and submit to you. If you go to the third pillar. Okay, data. It's a management tool. I think data is being a big discussion in the industry in general. But the monitoring portal or SCADA system is an early warning system. Most people use it only as a reporting tool. So that distinction determines whether you are going to manage the asset or you're just going to document what happened to it. So it's going to be the proactive or the reactive. So at the utility scale, this is on the left side, at the utility scale, the inverter level. The inverter level specific yield comparison is one of the most powerful diagnostic tools available. So if you have 20 central inverters on the site, and one is consistently producing 5% less, and the other ones next to it, and under the same irradiance conditions, which likely on the same site, when there's a fault in progress and it's not a reporting anomaly, and the aggregated PR will not show this to you. So inverter level data will show it to you. So it's really important what type of data you start to look at, understanding the data, what you look at, and not only focus on PR in these conditions, because it can actually hide certain other maintenance that's required or preventative maintenance that is required. Just on the right side, the CNI and the rooftop scale. So the same principles applies here. So if you have multiple inverters on a system, compare them. The monitoring portal obviously has the data. So the question is basically, are people actually looking at this data, or is it just looking at the production over time? And from my own perspective, you do need to look at the differences. So the more advanced application when it comes to predictive maintenance, condition-based intervention triggered by trend analysis rather than fault presentations. And then really good examples on the left side, and I'm currently sitting with a similar situation that we had recently. So the IGBT temperature example is instructive. If you are tracking thermal trend on your inverter power electronics, and you see a gradual upward drift over weeks, that is a failing cooling system announcing itself. And when the 2 or 3 other parameters that you can look at can quickly tell you what around the cooling system or ventilation actually becomes the problem. So then you can plan the intervention before it becomes a forced outage, and the gap is not the technology. We do have a technology everywhere. So every modern monitoring system can surface this data. So the gap is the human attention and the structured analysis. So I don't want to talk about AI today, but AI might help to bridge the gap in terms of human attention, structured analysis, but it's not going to be the solution. Once again, it's going to be a tool. It is going to be integrated in our data and in our systems and the processes and automation. But in the end, still somebody needs to look at that information and then act on it. And that's going to be a major that preventative maintenance and acting on data really makes a good O&M principle. So the pillar 4, owner accountability. So the contractor manages to their contract, and that's as I said in the beginning, by looking at their own things. And obviously, if you're the owner of a plant, then you look at the asset. The two things are not the same, so you are going to get differences. So if we look at, sorry, I moved on. If you're going to look at warranty evidence, so serial defect claims against a module or inverter manufacturers require documented evidence, and this is really important in O&M. Everything needs to be documented and recorded and be available for quite a long time afterwards. Obviously, if you're going to look at extension of plants after 20-year PPA, you will need to have actually the 20-year records as well. But maintenance records, photographic evidence, correspondence. So if your O&M records are poor, the manufacturer's legal team will use this against you. And evidence quality is an O&M program function. That's a fact. If we look at insurance compliance, that's this middle one. So most asset owners understand they need insurance. Fewer understand that the policy has maintenance obligations embedded in it. And that inadequate inverter ventilation can void a warranty. That's just an example. So non-compliant lighting protection maintenance, and if South Africa has significant lighting exposure, so it can result in rejected claims. And some of these things are standard exclusion clauses. It's not many of people that can read the insurance clauses, but some of them are really standard. They won't be flagged. They won't be flagged by anybody except until you go and read it, but they will definitely not be flagged normally by a contractor where it's not in their interest. And then lastly, from a contractor performance, so this is now outsourced. The contractual KPIs in your O&M agreement are a floor, not a ceiling. So an operator who consistently hits 97% availability is meeting their SLA or their warranted availability or their guaranteed availability, whatever you want to call it. But whether they are optimizing your asset or your plant or just managing it to the minimum is a big, big difference in terms of a question. And it can only be answered if you're actively engaged in a performance oversight. So what you should actually ask yourself at every O&M decision point is what one will do, yourself will do, if this was entirely your own capital that is at risk for this plant. It comes pretty much the same as your house versus a rental house. And that is why, for example, just Ant as well has moved into the full integrated IPP space, and where we are actually taking over the outsourced O&M for our solar plants and bring it in-house, and that is the business that I'm currently heading up and expanding on, just because of that owner's mindset, the difference how you look at the plant, how you act on the plant, and how you want to maximize, not to try and hit the warranted availability, but to excel or exceed above that warranted availability. Okay, so just 4 factors that make South Africa O&M different. So from a parts, and here I'm going to go very quickly. So from a parts availability, as you know, we do have O&M local representation, but it is limited compared to mature markets like European or North American markets, especially when it comes to inverters, special parts, specialized parts. If it fails, then it takes up to 6 weeks, ocean freight, and that's an outage. That obviously is lost production. So that's a big impact. The second one in terms of just spare parts, so the owner provider, sorry, this is a best practice around how to look at spare parts, and that is if the asset owner holds the critical spares and the owner provider, if it is outsourced, manages those stock levels and replenish it on behalf of the owner. And then that doesn't leave decision to the contractor do not leave this decision to contractor by default, because the incentive is to hold as little stock as possible. So what you want to do as an owner, as somebody as a plant, as an owner, you want to optimize plant performance. If something goes down, you want to have the right part, right time. And that means that interaction between the owner of a plant as well as you as an own entity. Lightning risk, I think I just want to say that there's certain areas in South Africa that really has a high lightning density. I think that's a word that they use, the flash density. And it can actually cause quite a lot of problems. So the designs, how you look at your lighting, how you manage around lighting, and ensure that everything in your terms of your plant actually is looked after, and in a way so that if there's any warranty, insurance claims, that you will be able to actually have everything in place so that you don't get a rejection of your insurance claim. I think the biggest issue about lighting is that the designs in South Africa is bad. Most of the sites I've been to, you can optimize it very quickly. Grid code compliance, and there's an error on that slide. Apologies for that. It's not South Africa Grid Code version 3.0, but 3.1. And we are going to talk, I think, quickly afterwards on this. So this is mostly for utility plants, but obviously we do connect to municipality grids and other embedded systems, and we do, so in other words, we must be aware of there is a grid code. There is certain things that we do need to comply with, and don't just go and install certain things and do it behind I almost want to say closed doors. Not telling getting the approvals in place. All of these things must actually be compliant in terms of our grid code, and that is to ensure the integrity of our South Africa grid. And then labor unrest, I think there I can just mention, but we have seen more on the utility scale. It's about work conditions, work opportunities mostly, where you are close to certain communities, and where you can get unrest, and that you might lose some time as well. And then I think pretty much last slide, so three things to take away. So the first one is execute the plan. So schedule your maintenance, lock in the dates, use your generation windows. Don't have open-ended deferrals. And if a window does shift, if there's any delay, for whatever reason, the next window gets booked immediately. So that discipline is what separates a well-run asset from one that degrades quietly. The second one is measure the contractor, not just the plant. So put response time, resolution time in your service level agreement or your contracts. Track actual performance against those targets every month. And if you are not tracking them, then you are not managing your O&M. Then you're just hoping for operational maintenance. And thirdly, own the accountability. So contractor manages their contract, you manage the asset. If you're the owner, make certain that you've got warranty evidence, insurance compliance, contractor performance above SLA floors, making sure that you've got an owner's mindset in terms of operation maintenance on the site. And you must not do it just because the guidelines say so, but because it is your capital that is at risk. So if you just have that frame of mind of an owner's mindset. And the gap between a well-run asset and a poorly run one is not technology. It is discipline and accountability, and those not scale with, and it's not scaled with asset size. So it means it's in a rooftop, it's at commercial installations, it's at utility scale. Okay, so from my side, just want to say thank you. The document that I have used a pillars from is the SAPIA Solar Power Europe Own Best Practice Guidelines. Is jointly developed by SAPIA and Vickys Sagan. And it is available at that the solarpowereurope.org. This slides will be shared afterwards, so obviously you can get it from there. If there's anything that you'd like to discuss with myself, my contact details are there as well. Yeah, and I believe it's a Q&A session later on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nicole. Thanks a lot for that presentation. It was and is very informative. We really, really appreciate it. And I guess really the take-home message is we need to own these assets. We need to own accountability. Yes, they might be belonging to individuals, IPPs, but let's look at it as an industry and take accountability as an industry for South African Inc. So these are our assets that we need to operate them well, we need to maintain them well. Thanks a lot, Nicole. If there are any questions, you can put them on the chat. Otherwise, you'll have an option to ask questions during the Q&A session. If Tabang, we can move into the next slide. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Grace Olekune. She will be talking to us on grid connection requirements and Eskom's perspective on operations and maintenance. She is a senior manager at Eskom Green, which is their renewable energy division. She also has an international academic experience or education, and she's been in the industry for over 21 years. I'm not going to butcher her CV, but just to say welcome, Grace. Thank you for sharing your perspective with us, and you can beam in your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sim, and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here. I will just project my presentation. Give me a second. Just checking that it's visible.
It is visible.
And that
Thank
you can hear me. All right.
I can hear you. Thank you.
Awesome. I think I'm glad Nicole went before me, because I think he's touched on a lot of the key things that I will be touching on in my presentation, and maybe just a different perspective. So as Eskom, I think we've been around for over 100 years, right? We've been doing O&M, we have been running power stations. And what we're talking about now is a different flavor, which is the green side of things, the renewable side of things. And in this case, particularly talking around PV. But I think the principles that I'll be sharing today cut across irrespective of the renewable technology that we're talking about. So from Eskom point of view, we have established our renewables division, and we're essentially continuing with the legacy that we started out with in 2011, where we started off with our wind energy plant, which is still running in the Western Cape. And then obviously we had the shift where the focus of renewables moved towards the IPPs. And we are now back, and we're actually learning from the IPPs. And it's been a good collaboration, and that's how we intend to continue with that. And we are now establishing Eskom Green as a function that's specifically looking around it. So in terms of our portfolio, we are probably the newest in the game, but when it comes to O&M, I think there's a lot of principles that we're already picking up that we can share and communicate in terms of what are the things that we should be looking into, and what are some of the practices that we can look into. So our portfolio currently is looking at about 60% of solar, and then BESS is going to be about 22%, and then we have pumped storage and wind. So this essentially constitutes the portfolio, and we're going to be scaling up quite quickly over time. And a lot of these are going to be partnerships, private and public sector partnerships that we're going to be looking at. So when we start talking O&M, I think it's important for us to understand why we need to do that. As Eskom has mentioned, we have been doing thermal plants for a long time, and there's a lot of principles around this that we can carry through. But the reason that we want to look at O&M for renewables differently is because we are looking at a different shift where you have a massive power station, which could be up to 4.8 gigs in one space. We now have many distributed generation units that are going to be sitting across the country. You have operations which are very OEM driven. And we are relying, and I think Nicole has touched on this quite significantly, so I'm not going to go into it in detail. But then, and he's also spoken to the data and the management of the data around that, which is critical, different from how you would be looking at maintenance. Here, you actually have to have an element of proactiveness in terms of how we look at operating and maintenance. And then the grid aspect, which is one of the things that I was asked to touch on, is the fact that we're now looking at grid coupled performance. So when we start looking at grid coupled performance, one of the things we need to make sure that we do is right up front, and I'm talking during design, front end engineering, you already need to be very clear in terms of how you're going to be connecting to the grid, which grid code compliance codes you need to actually work into your designs to make sure that they comply. Particularly in our case in South Africa, a lot of our suppliers, providers are international. And so they don't necessarily have a full understanding or appreciation for our grid code requirements. And this is something that can make or break your project at the end. And for some of the use cases that you would want to then provide on your plant or supply to the grid, you need to be very clear in terms of understanding what are the requirements that when you get to the end of it, it's not catching you at the end. Also different from a thermal plant where you are essentially following the grid. If they need you to go up, you go up. If they need you to go down, you go down. Here you're specifically influenced by your grid conditions, and your dispatch instructions are coming from the system operator. And you need to be aware of this and also be able to do the forecasting, which comes back to your data management upfront and your data predictability in terms of how you are going to then work together from a grid code performance point of view to meet what the requirements are. So I wanted to just start off with that part to say that when we talk about grid code requirements, those are things that start right in the design. If we start talking about it when we get to either commissioning or O&M, we've already missed the boat by far. So when we look at defining our execution frameworks, already when we start looking at projects, we may have clear delivery models, we may have proper governance and robust controls. We know how to execute projects. But when we start talking about technical assurance and quality, and when we start talking about having an integrated execution environment, those are the two spaces where we need, which will directly shape your long-term O&M outcomes. So while we are in the design phase, I've talked about incorporating all of your requirements for O&M into your design. And I think when we talk project management, we talk CPOMs, which is constructability, procurability, operability, maintainability, sustainability. And with those factors, we then need to bring that into the execution phase of our projects, looking at what are we looking for at every phase. During your execution, you're already building what we call we call it Eskom the design base. And the design base is essentially what is going to inform how you're going to operate and maintain your plant thereafter. So building that information needs to be very structured and it needs to be very deliberate. From the moment you start doing your detailed designs, you need to know, how am I going to label my plant? And this is some of the practical things that we find work quite well. We need to label the plant to make sure that whatever codes we have on the plant aligns and makes it easier when we start doing O&M later on, that we're able to incorporate these type of things into our maintenance and operations. So when we start talking about coding, one of the things that we have found is operating and maintenance plant coding, or let me call it configuration management, is not something that is available. Every plant has a different way of labeling, has a different way of coding the plant. But what we need to do, especially if you're looking at utility scale and if you're looking at multiplication and dispatchable plants across the country, for a company like us, for example, it's very important to have a standardized approach. So that's one of the things that we're starting to look into, is how do we standardize how we label plant across the country for all our projects in a way that is going to be repeatable and also makes maintenance repeatable, irrespective of which part of the plant or which part of the country that you are working. So all of this starts when we start talking about our technical and our quality assurance. And when we get into the integrated execution environment, we need to then understand how our interface with the grid and how we operate impacts what we do. There could be regulatory requirements in our operating and maintenance that needs to be done on a frequency of maybe 3 months, or certain tests that need to be done. We need to be aware of that, and we need to work that into our O&M operation or philosophies, if I'm to call it that, in terms of what it is that we need to do to make sure that we remain grid code compliant. One of the things that we also have to do at some point it depends on the frequency, depending on the code that you're using, you need to know when you need to do your grid code tests. So there are specific tests that you would then work with the system operator, and you need to be familiar with what those are so that you can then plan them in. There are regulatory or statutory testing that might be required in the space that you're working in, depending on the utility scale plant that you're working on. But I think the summary of the slide is saying that what we do during execution highly influences how we operate and maintain the plant later. So why this matters is, for us, I think from a SAPVIA point of view, what's important to look at is how do we standardize? Standardize for the purpose of our South African environment, across IPPs, across companies like Eskom, across with the OEMs, because at the end of the day, we have the responsibility of ensuring energy security, but not just that, we also need to make sure that it's affordable. So what are the things that we need to do as an industry to make sure that we can reduce the life cycle costing of what it is that we need to do? So currently we're very dependent on the OEM. And I think Nicole has touched on this quite a bit. What are the things that we need to do to make sure that we can even localize? I think the Deputy Minister of Electricity has a forum that she runs with, which is SAREM. Those are partnerships that we could look at to see how do we ensure and create local capacity, not just from a skill point of view, but even from an equipment point of view. How do we ensure that we can localize also to build the economy, which I think we mentioned at the beginning? And how do we ensure that we can do that together in a standardized way that can then give the bigger value? So as much as we started, and I think Nicole has touched on it, where we started in 2016 and we have an aging fleet, what we're actually seeing now is an acceleration in multi-gigawatts of renewable energy that's coming in. And so what's important is for us to make sure that we evolve from an O&M point of view, because if we do not, what we're actually going to end up with is very high costs. And I think all of that has been touched in the previous presentation. And we're going to keep remaining dependent on OEMs, particularly those who are abroad. And if now that we have international issues across the borders, we know the wars and things that break out, it may then put us in a situation which will send us back to having shortage of electricity, which we do not want to experience. Load shedding for us is a thing of the past. I just want to throw that in there. So 3 things: scale challenge in terms of moving from a project to fleet operations. We need to look at the cost pressures and the impact that that's having and solve for that. What do we need to look at from a life cycle costing point of view that we could reduce and that we could holistically or collectively look at? And then also identify the capability gaps that are there. And like I said, not just from a skills point of view, but even from an equipment point of view. There are things that we can probably stimulate the economy by starting to manufacture locally. What are those things that we need to do? And the element of innovation that needs to come in with that, particularly now with an aging fleet, What do you do with the equipment at the end? How can you repurpose and rework some of these things to be able to reuse them in one way or another, whether within the industry or outside of, but still within the South African landscape? So I think what I'm saying here is that this is a industry coordination that we need to drive together. So I think the focus areas for us from an O&M point of view is that safety is key, right? Life cycle asset management, and I think we've differentiated asset management from operating and maintenance. Having your digital first O&M, and what this means is what type of automation do we need to have? How do we leverage AI to support what it is that we want to deliver? And once we have that clear, we can then start scaling across because we have standardized. And this is something that, irrespective of which part of the country or even continent for that matter that you are, these are things that we can easily apply, and the guidelines are there to take us through how to go about it in a standardized way, and we start building best practices locally. So I'm not going to go through, there's a lot of information on the slide, and the intention is not to go through it. You will get the presentation. But one of the things that I've noticed in terms of the key areas where we have gaps when it comes to our O&M strategies, each one of these boxes, if you want to call it that, is actually a strategy that needs to be in place. How do we do our asset management? What does our life cycle model look like? When we talk OEM, what type of warranties and contracting strategies do we have? The technology specific, when we talk PV or when we start talking BESS or hybrid, for the most part, we're starting to move towards PV with another technology. We can't just say, no, now we have an O&M strategy for PV, we're going to then apply it to the other technologies. We need to be very specific on the technology that we're using. I've talked about data. I think Nicole has touched on it significantly in terms of the data management, but also the ownership of the data is something that's critical. Who owns the data? Where does the data sit? How do we use the data to do our predictive maintenance and analytics as we go through or as we progress through the life of the plant? What should we expect? How do we then respond in terms of that? Then when we talk grid, again, we need to look at the operational interfaces. How do we interact with the system operator, between the generator and the system operator? How do we manage it when they need us to pull in and pull out as they require, particularly where you're talking about curtailment, but also when we're talking about dispatch and compliance? What are the processes that we need to have in place, and how do we go about doing that? And then lastly is the performance, the cost and scaling model. The KPIs, I think the KPIs that were shared earlier by Nicole were powerful. I mean, those are things that are practical and tangible things that we need to look at. So we need to be very clear, because particularly if we're going to be scaling from our lower type projects, or let me say the smaller scale projects, to utility scale, we need to be very clear, because if we don't, then we're going to have very fragmented O&M models. And again, we still remain on this high dependency on the OEM, and we're going to struggle to scale. So if this is where we are going from an environmental sustainability point of view, we need to make sure that it is sustainable in terms of how we roll it out. I'm flying through because I know I have a time limit. The two main things that I wanted to draw out from this slide is the opportunity for partnerships, particularly where it adds value. So as I indicated, we have this high dependency on OEMs. We could shift from going from OEM-led to an owner-led, and this was also touched on in the previous presentation. What is our strategy for getting into that? How do we look at our performance-based contracts? How do we look at our warranties? But more importantly, how do we ensure that we can then get that knowledge locally to the people who particularly live in that area, stimulating that particular economy, and also ensuring that we are retaining the skills within and creating room for innovation and different ways of how we can do things that speak specifically to the South African landscape. Then also the insourcing of critical O&M capabilities. So this is where you're intentional in determining what are the skills that are required, what capabilities are required, and how can we go about making sure that we can have these things in-house as the owner who is accountable for your plant. it may cost you more, and maybe you may be thinking about it from but a head count is going to cost me more over the long term. But if you are going to be retaining critical skills, you may find that overall your cost control is going to be better, and your long-term sustainability of your plants, particularly if you're planning to scale in multiple sites and multiple places, is going to be the case for you. So these are just some of the strategic options that you have. And we've talked about the digital, and then also the commercial and the contracting strategy. So what we should expect then, once we have this in place, is that we have high availability and energy yield because we are consistently applying the operating standards that we have developed. We are clear on what are the best practices that need to be applied across the industry, and we're therefore able to structurally lower our life cycle O&M costs, which is what we want to do at the end of the day. Sustainability, I've talked about, where we are then also building renewable specific operational skills. If we look at where South Africa is versus the rest of the world, we are lagging behind quite significantly. So what does a JET transition look like in the case of renewable specific operational skills? How do we build a workforce that we can transition into the long-term asset ownership? And then also then when we start looking at industrialization, I think industrialization is something that we cannot divorce ourselves from. Industrialization and O&M are, for me, things that go hand in hand. And that's where I was talking about the localizing of equipment for the purpose of what we need in the industry. How do we go about doing that? Again, because we need to stimulate our economy or grow our economy. So my view is that almost in closing is that we need to then look at these gaps and make them execution realities. This slide is just talking in terms of breaking it down into people, plant, and processes. How do we look at our skills? How do we ensure that our workforce is able to meet the requirements of what we're doing going into the future in alignment with our JET objectives? From a plant point of view, we're talking technology-specific O&M. We are talking grid operation and dispatch interface, being very clear on how that works, spares, logistics, and localization strategies. And when we talk process, we're looking again at our asset management, warranty and contract management, financial, digital, safety, health and environment, and also just looking at how do we scale and what does scaling look like? So if I'm to put this into a picture, I would say that as an industry, we can look at putting a pilot together. What does it look like? How do we set ourselves up? What are the things that we need to do looking to go into the future? And then we start looking at standardizing some of these things. What type of governance do we need to have in place? How do we want to, what should the structure look like if you're insourcing versus if you're outsourcing? And then we start talking about scaling, and we talk about optimizing what the O&M capability should look like. But each of these phases would deliberately reduce the O&M reliance, which is what we want, OEM reliance, because we want to be able to be owners more of these plants and be able to do these things for ourselves. So in closing, I think it's important for us to be very clear on the next steps. So what I've put here is what we are looking at from an Eskom perspective, which is on the left side, and what I think we need to look at from a SAPFIA O&M working group focus point of view. At Eskom, we're looking at defining asset ownership across the life cycle. Who owns what, particularly if you're going to be developing projects as an SPV? What does that look like right from the beginning? Establishing our design base early. This is our data management, all the documentation required for O&M. Do we know what those are upfront? Configuration management. What are the things we need to do from a configuration management point of view in terms of labeling our plants so that therefore in future when we're operating and maintaining, we are clear on the standards that we have applied and the approach that we have applied there. Also then we're building capability ahead of the project. So we don't wait until we get to O&M to start training people who are going to be doing O&M. We're bringing them into the projects during development early for them to get the knowledge and the understanding of the plant. And what we're also then doing is putting together our O&M strategy on what does O&M need to look like, particularly per technology for us going into the future, so that we can enable decentralized execution while we have centralized governance. On the SAPVIA side, my recommendations are that we look at standardizing O&M frameworks. I know there's a guideline that's already available, and I think, like was mentioned earlier, Europe is already looking at some of these things. Let's take best practices, but understanding some of the nuances that are specific to South Africa, engaging with OEMs and having kind of norms. I know there may be a lot of bespoke type of contracts, but what are the key things that we need to put in place so that we address the gaps that Nicole was talking about earlier? How do we then set up our contracts for O&M where we're going to be outsourcing it, and what does that shift into insourcing partially or fully look like? Digital and data interoperability, and then also looking at our localization roadmap, both from a skills and from an industry point of view, and then benchmarking cost and performance. If you look at the Bloomberg costs on per technology, if you look at where we are, whether you look at PV or whether you look at BEST, South Africa is still significantly more expensive than other countries. So what are the things that we need to do for us to bring down the cost of capital, but also the cost of O&M thereafter? So for us, it's about moving from a project-based delivery to a coordinated fleet O&M execution. And I think that's my story. Hopefully I didn't take too much time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you for that. Yeah, we can give her a round of applause for that detailed presentation. It's very practical, very clear. Your suggestion on what you think SAPVIA working group should focus on, highly noted. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. And how it's seamlessly, connected with Nicole's presentation. We thank you a lot. And I think for me, the take-home message really from this presentation is about standardization. How do we standardize and make sure that we have our own South African standard? And I think colleagues who are in this call, that's why we're having the working group to actually make sure that industry comes together so that we are able to standardize. We are able to look. Yes, we need energy security is very key, but it has to be energy security, like Grace has said. And we also need to look at cost, the cost of electricity. How do we make sure that through our operations and maintenance, we drive down cost so that the consumer is able to pay less? And I like the way you brought in SAREM. Yes, it is one of the initiatives that SAPVIA is working with. And how you spell out clearly on how you see these building skills in the country, but also capabilities of the industry to start manufacturing these components in South Africa. Thank you, Grace, for that presentation. We highly appreciate it. And if you have questions for Grace, you can put them on the chat, or you can wait for the Q&A session at the end. Tabang, we can go to the next speaker. Our next speaker is Mr. Willie Lemkhize. He is the head of department for licensing and compliance at NERSA. He's a seasoned energy specialist. He holds a number of degrees. Maybe I'll just mention two. He holds a master's degree in electrical engineering from UCT. He also holds a master's degree in business administration from Wits Business School. He's also a bit of an academic in a sense that he's also studying towards his PhD, focusing on reforms of electricity distribution. He works for NERSA, and he will obviously be telling us what the regulator is expecting of the industry or of us, and operations and maintenance standards. Willie, the floor is yours, sir.
I beg your pardon. Thank you very much, Mr. Kuluse. I beg your pardon for if I butchered your surname.
No,
Good
you did well.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon to yourself and to everyone on the call. I take it as a privilege that we should be invited to, to come and have this discussion this afternoon. I think it's become a bit of a tradition that, the regulator, or NERSA rather, is invited at the annual webinars that SAPVIA holds. And I believe that it's a good initiative, to really create these synergies and relationships with the industry, for us as a regulator, because, we all really need to learn from one another, as well as understand each other's worlds. I do believe that the regulatory world has been kind of isolated for quite some time, but I think now we are moving closer to the industry that we regulate. So thank you very much to SAPVIA for this invitation. I have prepared a presentation. Chair, I don't know if it's visible. I just want to
Yes, it
ensure
is
that.
visible.
All right. So thank you. Thank you.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you. So I will start with the introduction, and then we want to just look at the regulatory landscape in terms of NERSA's expectations. By the way, just to give a bit of a background, I am the head of department for licensing and compliance. So in compliance, part of what we do is that we do audits at various generation, transmission, distribution sites. So in as far as generation is concerned, we look at all licensed, IPPs, which would include PV plants, wind, as well as the Eskom coal fleet. I know we've just had an Eskom speaker before me. Yes, we have started also auditing Eskom as of last year. After a very long time, Eskom was able to fight us successfully in the past, but when I arrived, we've now managed to push back on whatever the limits that Eskom had set, and we are now able to audit the Eskom coal fleet as well. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned. Number 4, O&M standards. What should PV plants do? Conclusion, and then the practical takeaways for the members. Hopefully, it's going to be something slightly nuanced, different, rather to what the other members have said, but I'm sure we are all having more or less the same message. So in terms of the presentation, we wanted to just provide an overview of what are the expectations of NERSA primarily, as well as some of the standards, with regards to O&M operations and maintenance. Then we also want to highlight some of the audit findings that we have, some of the findings after compliance audits. And then we also want to look at practical O&M standards and best practices to ensure compliance, safety, as well as good performance. Some of the information that I will share here has been extracted from NERSA's audit report, as well as external industry standards. So yeah, some of the information will need to be redacted before it is shared for the purpose of confidentiality. Just in terms of the legal framework, we primarily rely on the ERA, which is the Electricity Regulations Act, for guidance in terms of what is the legal requirements when it comes to the electricity industry. And I think what is pertinent in this discussion is Section 4, which talks about NERSA's duty to ensure compliance, particularly to enforce compliance with license conditions, some of which require that every licensee maintains their plant according to the required standards. So that's one of the requirements, as well as license condition, that we ensure compliance to. The South African Grid Code, as well as other standards, all ensure that we have a functioning industry, particularly the generation industry. So all licensed generators are subject to regular NERSA audits, at least they are supposed to. And these cover license conditions, grid codes, as well as best engineering practices. We also have the GCCRPP, which is the Grid Connection Code for renewable power plants. This is also a standard that is used for the purposes of auditing. So what are the key compliance requirements or areas? It is required to maintain separate accounts and submit annual reports to NERSA. And this is obviously for the licensed IPPs. Notify NERSA of any changes in company details, processes, or operational status. Comply with all sections of the Grid Code and the Grid Connection Code for renewable power plants. Retest Grid Code compliance every 6 years. I think that is a requirement number 6 in the Grid Code. Retain operational and maintenance data for at least 5 years. So this is very important. I think Ms. Olukune also spoke about the importance of data management. So this must be kept, just like the SARS information for 5 years. And then conduct regular environmental and health and safety audits. So these are all the key requirements. And then, so who was audited recently? Recent audit included so-called Aurora Ridgevlei Solar Power Park, which is around 10.8 megawatts at Vredendal Solar Power Park, or as well as Vredendal Solar Power Park, which is around 9.52 megawatts. So what were some of the positive findings for these PV plants? Well, we found that both Aurora Ridgevlei and Vredendal Solar Power Park fully complied with license conditions, as well as the grid code. So this is very much commendable. I think it's what we have come to expect out of most of our IPPs, or rather licensed IPPs, that there is a general sense of compliance. But where we have found some concerns is with some parts of the grid code. And I think I will share that with you a bit later. So we also found that maintenance strategies were in place based on OEM recommendations, and these were managed via computerized maintenance management systems, or SAP. So the outage management was proactive and coordinated, and it was coordinated with distributors where the plants are connected. There were asset registers and internal labeling standards were maintained, and spares were also available on site. So some of these things have been touched on, and we just want to confirm that this is being done, and this was confirmed through audits. Environmental and safety compliance was strong with regular audits and trained officers. And then in terms of performance, Aurora Rietvlei exceeded estimated performance, and then Vredendal met the expectations. So as I said earlier, some of the plants do fail to confirm the 6-year compliance retesting, and we've seen quite a number of applications for exemption in this regard, and the reasons are various. They vary from software upgrades to equipment not meeting certain testing criteria. But I think it's important that we ensure that plants are properly maintained throughout the 6-year cycles, so that when it comes to the testing after 6 years, they are able to meet those test requirements as outlined in the grid code. I think we can talk more about the specifics in terms of what the tests are and so on, but I don't think we have enough time here. All right, and then the other gap is the inadequate data archiving, which means that the data that is available on site or in the archives is not for the full 5-year period. So it's important to ensure that we take care of these two factors. And then if we look at the NERSA requirements, I think we've outlined those above, as well as the international IEC standards and industry best practice. What should PV plants do? So number one, it's very important to adopt a preventative as well as a predictive maintenance philosophy. So what does this entail? This entails normal routine visual inspections of modules, inverters, transformers, and cabling. So we don't wait for this to fail. And I think this was covered adequately in the first presentation. And then it also means that we need real-time performance monitoring through SCADA or some equivalent equipment. Thermographic inspections to detect hotspots or faulty modules is very important as part of the routine maintenance, at least every 3 months. And then it's also important to do regular cleaning of modules tailored to site conditions. Obviously, for places that are more prone to dust, more regular cleaning of the PV modules is required. And I think this is all just common sense. Then on the side of documentation and record keeping, which is sometimes what lacks. I know we visited one plant in Cape Town, which I won't mention the name. It was a wind farm, but on the primary plant, I think things were quite satisfactory, but on the balance of plant, which was on the substation and the rest, we found that there were no maintenance records at all. You didn't even have records for the battery bank, which usually, you do need to maintain records in terms of the change of the battery liquid and so on. But there was no information that was kept there at all. So it's very important to maintain detailed logs of all maintenance activities, as well as to document and investigate all faults, outages, or safety incidents. This is important. It's also important to archive operational as well as maintenance data for at least 5 years. I think we've mentioned this previously. And of course, this can be done manually, but it's important to, it's easier to have a computerized maintenance management system. And then further, compliance and testing. It's important to perform initial and periodic testing every 6 years for grid code compliance testing, as well as follow OEM recommended maintenance schedules, implement and regularly review safety procedures to ensure that staff are trained and certified. It's very important, safety procedures in terms of what needs to be done in emergencies. And then in terms of asset and outage management, it's important to keep an up-to-date asset register and to ensure that spares are readily available. It's the time that it can take to source a spare, is time that could mean that the power plant is not able to put, electricity on the grid. So it's very important to ensure that we minimize plant outages. Plan outages to minimize production loss and to coordinate with the grid operators. I think that's been touched on. Environmental management to conduct regular environmental audits, ensure proper disposal of replacement modules, batteries, and hazardous materials. I think that is well understood and documented. So in conclusion, I can't believe I'm concluding already. The latest NERSA audit shows that South African PV plants are able to achieve full compliance as well as high performance. But what is important is to follow robust O&M strategies based on OEM and regulatory requirements, maintain thorough documentation and data retention, prioritize safety, environmental, as well as proper asset management practices. However, even well-run plants must remain vigilant about periodic compliance testing and data archiving to avoid regulatory risks. So just in terms of the last slide, Chairperson, we are wanting to say that the use of computerized maintenance management systems or SAP system are important to schedule and track all maintenance activities. So with a little bit of an investment in a CMMS system, one can achieve a lot in terms of proper scheduling and tracking of all maintenance activities. What we spoke about in terms of record keeping is part of what a proper CMS system can do. And then conduct annual internal compliance audits using the NERSA audit questionnaire as a template. So I think this is something that we can provide where you can do your own internal compliance audit, possibly in preparation of a NERSA audit or for your own compliance purposes, to ensure that you are compliant with regulatory requirements. So we can provide that template and then schedule a grid code retesting every 6 years and retain all test reports, maintain a digital archive of operational data accessible for at least 5 years, and then invest in staff training for compliance, safety, as well as technical skills, and then engage with SAPVIA for updates on regulatory changes and industry best practices. So I think these are the 6 takeaway points that we want to share. So by embedding these simple practices, PV plant owners can ensure regulatory compliance, optimize plant performance, and reduce inherent operational risks. So thank you, Chair. I think we've sort of tried to put a cherry on top of the cake that the other speakers have so wonderfully baked and prepared for us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Welile. Again, such a wonderful presentation. We thank you. For me, I'm just super proud of, in a way, you also gave us the results of how the fleet, the South African PV fleet, is doing. You basically said that we are able to fully comply and we are showing high levels of performance. And indeed, colleagues, it is for that reason that we're trying to maintain that high standard by coming together, collaborating, and having this working group to actually ensure that going forward, we don't drop the ball, we continue moving from strength to strength. And I love how Welile's presentation actually created that golden thread from where Nicole started in terms of documentation. He basically emphasized the importance of monitoring and documenting. And we will certainly be reaching out to you to get that cheat sheet or that audit template for our members so that our members know what to expect and they prepare accordingly. And ladies and gentlemen, I think we're moving to the exciting part of the program where you get to ask questions and get your questions answered. So you can raise your hand if you have a question, and my colleagues will unmute you and you'll be able to put through your questions to our panel. Questions, comments, suggestions? Word of appreciation? All of the above. It means that our speakers were very, very good. I don't see any hand up. I see one hand is appearing. Oh, Dr. Milamu, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. First, a word of appreciation to all our speakers. Thank you very much, Nicole, Anthem team. Thank you, Grace and the ESCOM team, and Welile and the ESCOM team. This has been incredibly insightful for all of us, and we've taken a lot of notes. I take that our members have probably taken the same copious notes that we have. And we look forward to collaborating with you. It goes without saying that both ESCOM and Anthem are members of SAPVIA, and so we will continue to collaborate with members and the regulator. And so I thought it was a really useful engagement with those specific insights from very critical players in the O&M space. So I thought I should just convey my appreciation to the speakers and indicate that we look forward to engaging and working with them into the future. Thanks. So maybe a question to Nicole and Grace around prioritization. I think they made several recommendations, and indeed, Welile, they made several recommendations on areas that they suggesting we as an industry association, as an industry body, ought to focus on behalf of the industry. Of all those recommendations that you proposed, and in the light of the capacity constraints that we have, if we were to pick up 2 or 3 for this current year, which ones would be your top 3? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Milambo. Maybe I'll start with Nicole. Your 2 or 3 areas that we can prioritize.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Dr. Tawi. So it's one might slightly be contentious in terms of if it's O&M, but so I think from an O&M perspective, I think this document that has been commissioned or co-authored or and this is the O&M guideline that is published on your website. I think that's something that you must actually relaunch to this working group. It's a really good document. If you actually go take the time, we are sitting really in this industry, looking at plants, looking at issues from an asset management perspective, as well as an O&M, as well as in a comprehensive, everything that's required. I think it's a really good document that actually must be pushed forward again. That's number one, and it will help. I mean, it's not for utility scale only. It's really for any type of installation where we are working with O&M and how everything fits together. The second thing is, I think that really needs to be taken forward as a SAPIA. I'm not sure how it's going to be through the O&M, but seeing that we do have NASA in this call as well as Eskom, is about the grid code compliance, as well as 6-yearly grid code compliance, as well as obviously just the role of the O&M and how that's going to play it out. Because quite often we know the owners, the plant SPVs, they know they need to do something. When you sit with the consultants that plays in that space as well, and when you sit with the O&M operators that actually needs to quite often do the work with the SCADA systems, with the data, dry run testing and all of these things. I think it is something that we can actually make more visible. And this is a little bit more to the utility scale. The question is, what is the requirements for a commercial rooftop installation, or just a commercial installation? Doesn't need to be rooftop. Are we trying to hide and just get these things in, or are we actually trying to follow the requirements in terms of ensuring that we have a stable grid? So yeah, I think those are the 2 for me that will be of great benefit.
Thanks a lot, Nicole, for those 2. So we'll certainly be relaunching the operations and maintenance best practices guidelines, and hopefully we will look into where needs be tweak it a bit to ensure that it is relevant, and we'll look into the grid code compliance. Grace, if you could come through. Ori, I see your hand.
Yeah, so I think I agree with what Nicole has put on the table. So for me, it's the standardization aspect, like you correctly picked up. That was key for me. Is what are those? There's the guidelines, and I think that's a good place to start. What is, if I am going to be operating and maintaining a utility scale plant, what are the things I need to have in place? And I think one of the areas which also Welile touched on is the aspect of your CMMS. What type of information do you need to contain there? But for us, one of the things that we know is configuration management doesn't just start right at the end. Already during your design phase, if you already bring that into your design where you're building your plant breakdown structure, that then becomes the same plant breakdown structure you can use for your O&M. So standardizing a framework across for data and configuration management. And then I think, as you've mentioned, it's something that's already being done, but how do we then map what we're doing from an O&M framework point of view to practicalizing it or from a skills and localization point of view, like with what SARM is doing? Being very clear on what is the output of the deliverable, or what do we want to see, and looking at it from an O&M context, I think is something that we can look into. So if I'm to add to, I think the data aspects have already been touched on by Nicole. So I would say for me, those are the two key ones that I would bring to the table. Thanks.
Maybe before we go to Pori, we can bring Welile. The 2 or 3 focus areas.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. I think mine that I would have put on the table have already been covered. And that is in terms of the 6 yearly tests as per the grid code, as well as, ensuring that, all the data is kept in a manner that is auditable and, in a manner that, I think auditable is the right word. So I think those are the two that I would also emphasize, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thanks for the question, Tabi, and thanks for those answers. Without wasting time, let's move to, I think it's a question or comment from Pori. I hope I'm not butchering your name. You'll forgive me if I do. Are you able to unmute? Tawang, if you can please assist with unmuting the mic. There's a hand up, Pam or Tabang, if you can just please assist with unmuting.
Yeah, please unmute. I'm also unable to unmute.
Can you try now, Pori? You should be able to unmute.
If not, maybe we then need to, if you don't mind, just dropping your question on the chat box. Okay, it doesn't look like it's working. We will come back to your question while the team is busy trying to sort out the technicalities. Maybe let's just move to the next. Is there any other questions so that I can just note those hands as soon as we're able to figure out how to unmute? We will then come back and take those questions. If you can just raise your hand so that the team can just unmute you as we go along. You can move to the next slide, Tabang. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we have been saying we're launching the working group. So obviously, as you launch the working group, we then have leaders from the industry who assist us in leading the working groups. And because this is the first of the new working groups that we're launching, we then went to our members to try and see who could assist us leading this working group. I am pleased to announce that Raymond Murupa, who is the operations and maintenance manager from one of our members, Rod Rockets, has agreed to lead, to form part of the leadership of this working group. Just a bit about him. He obviously brings a lot of experience in the renewable energy space. Just like most electricity or energy professionals, he started his career at Eskom and has worked for a number of IPPs. A bit about his qualifications. He holds a government ticket or the Government Certificate of Compliance, GCC. Among his qualifications, he has a master's in business administration, and he also holds a Bachelor of Technology in Electrical Engineering, heavy current. Thank you, Raymond, for agreeing to steer the ship as we move forward. Maybe I will see if they can unmute you, just to give you a minute or two to say a few words so that the members and the industry will know who you are. The floor is yours, sir. Are we able to unmute Raymond? Okay, thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for this beautiful day, the opportunity to join this fundamental organization. I won't have more words. I just wish to extend my appreciation and then highlighting that I'm grateful to join the team and contribute into the renewable energy space, especially in the renewable energy industry. And it pleases me to see the key players at the regulatory body being incorporated, the Eskom, I usually call it the mother body. And looking at it, it gives confidence that some of the gaps that from Nicole that he has highlighted, some of important points that Grace has put down, the findings, the positive findings and other negative findings from NERSA, that it will be helping us to ensure that there is a compliance, ensure that there is a standardization. It's quite pleasant to see the stakeholders of such caliber in the organization. Just to add even one point from Grace, when she was talking about the asset management, where we need to look at the gaps that are there between our reliance to OEMs, the contracts in terms of the insurance and the warranties that are given by the OEMs, which it's a very big gap. And it's very exciting to hear that we are many that we are looking at that with that eyes in the industry to say, how do we bridge this gap? Because most of the organizations, they tend to struggle in actually computing the RCAs, as they can become expensive, and we rely on OEMs, and the renewable energy industries sometimes struggle to get to claims of the warranties because of the lack of skills, the lack of resources. I'm happy to join, and thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you, Raymond, for those words, and you're more than welcome. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know if we were able to unmute Pori.
You should be able to unmute.
Please try and unmute, otherwise I'll read your question from the chat. Okay, so the question on the chat says, thanks for the high-level presentations. Who should apply for licensing? This question stems from the case where, as a rooftop installer, one manages several plants, but not in one locality. So who should apply for licensing? This question stems from the case where, as a rooftop installer, one manages several plants, but not in one locality. Maybe I can, I'm thinking to give it to you, Mr. Mkhize.
Yes, Chair. I think that one is quite straightforward. Any PV or any other technology, if the plant is greater than 100 kilowatts, it must be registered with NERSA. So anything less than that, if it's less than 100 kilowatts, then that particular installation must be registered with the network service provider. So whether it be installed on the municipal network or on Eskom's network, then it must be registered there, even if it's 1 kilowatts. But anything above 100 kilowatts must then be registered with NERSA.
Yep.
Thanks.
No, thanks for that. Maybe may I add just the other part of the question was who? I suppose the ultimate responsibility lies with the owner of that plant.
Yes, my apologies for not answering that part, but it's actually the operator.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, you can decide to own the plant, Chair, but give it to, for example, Red Rocket to operate it for you. So we license Red Rocket, the operator of the plant.
Okay. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands. Because of time, we will jump into the next slide. I'll hand over to my colleague, Zim Kita, to take us through the next two slides.
Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to the presenters for that very detailed and very informative presentations that we've just had. So to move forward from the launch, or rather the next steps from here, we will then be having our very first working group meeting on the 18th of June at 10 o'clock. I kindly request to participate in this working group. Please scan this QR code and register to participate in the working group. Alternatively, if you're struggling, you can just put your email in the chat box. But yeah, this is where our working groups is really the platform that we have where we action all these ideas that we have so that we can make a difference in the industry. Thanks. We can move on to the next slide. Thanks, Pam. So the next item I would like to talk about is our upcoming AGM and industry awards that will be taking place on the 2nd of July. There's three ways you can participate in the events of the 2nd of July. One, participate at the AGM. This is where we make the big decisions as an industry. And as SAVIA is a member-led industry, this is an opportunity for members, one, at the AGM to nominate whom they would like to have them represent in the SAVIA board, of which we refer to as the governing committee. So our members' voices matter. So it's very important that you do register, that you participate and nominate a representative that could participate as a member in the governing committee. And then the second part is we have our award ceremony. This year we have 9 categories that you could nominate yourself or a deserving industry member that you think is deserving to win that award. So you can submit your nominations. The nominations were closing today, but we've extended it up until Friday. So please take advantage of this opportunity and submit your nominations. And then the last part, how you can participate in our AGM and annual awards, is through sponsorship. Again, if you scan the QR code, it will take you to the events page where you'll be able to see, one, how to submit nominations for the awards, and also how to participate as a sponsor. If you are struggling, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm happy to put my email address in the chat box, and we can continue the conversation and take it offline. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Zimkhitha. We have come to the end of our launch, and thank you for your time, for joining us, and thank you to the panel of speakers. They did a great job, and we are wiser. We, as an industry, we know where to go as an industry. We know that we've been doing good job as an industry, and we will be continuing. Thank you, colleagues. If you need any information regarding SAVIA, our contact details are there. Please get in touch with us. Other than that, see you on the 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Keep
Bye.
well. Bye-bye.